Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I talked to you directly one time before on Monday. This is going to be my last chance to talk with you. You may note that I will probably try to slow down a little bit because I have been instructed by the court reporter that I was speaking at 330 words a minute yesterday, which is about 100 over what she's rated for. So I need to try to pace myself a little bit. So if it sounds like I'm slowing down on purpose, I'm trying to help the court reporter out today. Mr. Padovano and I and my team thank you for your careful attention to this case. No one thanks you more for your attention to this case than Denise Williams. I'm going to talk to you in my closing argument about 5 distinct areas. I can't do PowerPoint presentations. I will probably at some point try to put something here and it will be upside down and you won't be able to read it. So I'm going to try to talk to you and I'm going to trust in your memories and in your note-taking and in what you've heard over the last 3 days of evidence, but also what you have not heard over the last 3 days in evidence. The first thing I want to start with is just to remind you of something you already know, something that you would recognize based on the instructions that Judge Hankinson has provided. This is not a case about feeling sorry for anyone. This is not a case about trying to get, quote, justice for Mike. This is not a case about concerts. It's not a case about suspicions. It's not a case about guesses. It's not a case about trips. It's not a guess about pictures. It's not a guess about how you feel about Denise Williams. It's not a case about how you feel about Cheryl Williams. It's not a case about how people mourn. It is not a case about how people grieve. It is not a case about whether people smile. It is not a case about whether people sit there and stare. This is a murder case. I believe it would be helpful for you to consider the following. When evaluating all of the evidence, or the lack of evidence that has been produced by the state of Florida in this case, please try for a moment as an exercise to remove from what you've heard any taint of Brian Winchester. Take the evidence that has been presented to you and take Brian Winchester out of it. If you take Brian Winchester out of the things that have been shown to you, you have nothing. That has been confirmed, ladies and gentlemen, by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement agents. You recall Agent Devaney on Tuesday testified that there was no corroborating evidence, there was no physical evidence, there was no tangible evidence that implicates Denise Williams in the murder of Mike Williams. That this case began and was investigated over numerous years by numerous agencies. Let's talk about the agencies and the timing, because this is a long time. Mike Williams was murdered by Brian Winchester at the end of the Clinton administration. Into the early part of the Bush administration in 2002, the evidence shows that law enforcement had already sent an inquiry to Kansas City Life. It's 2002. There's a follow-up in 2004 to the same insurance company, which, by the way, paid the premium, paid the policy, because, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that's what life insurance does. Life insurance pays out. You heard the representative of Kansas City Life testify that they did their investigation, they paid the policy. Insurance, I want to call it a red herring. Mr. Fuchs has a picture of the insurance with some red stuff on what looks like money. It's not even a red herring. It's not even really anything. Mike Williams was insured. Mike Williams passed away. Insurance paid out. One thing the state didn't tell you in their model, or in their movie, so to speak, is based on what Investigator Sparkman said. The one thing we know, of course, is that the government always thinks it's the spouse. But the state said, follow the money. Well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, where did they follow the money to? Did they present any evidence to you where the money went? Where the money is now? How the money was spent? No, they didn't. Because it's a throwaway line. It's a throwaway. The policy's a throwaway. I'm going to tell you why that is. But true law enforcement does follow the money, but in this case they didn't. They didn't have to. And I'll tell you why a little bit later. But it is clear that the spouse is always the suspect. But going back, if you take out Brian Winchester, what do you have? You have a couple of concert tickets to some marginal bands. Maybe they were in 98. Maybe they were in 2000. Maybe they were in 2001. You have some tickets. You have testimony that in 1998, Angela Stafford went out with Brian Winchester after Denise's baby shower, and the next morning, Denise Williams gave her a dirty look. Maybe she gave her a dirty look because Brian Winchester was married to Kathy Winchester at the time. Maybe being best friends, Denise Williams took a dim view of Brian Winchester going out with another woman. Doesn't corroborate anything. Two people went out in 1998. You have testimony of a truck parked at a church. But without Brian Winchester, what is that? That wasn't Denise Williams' truck. It was Brian's truck. And we already know in 1999, that's after Brian had already started fooling around with Miss Stafford. We heard that testimony from her own mouth. And we also heard the testimony of where did Miss Stafford stay sometimes when she was in town. Sometimes she stayed with Miss Winchester and Mr. Winchester at Centennial Oaks. So there was a car there. That doesn't prove anything. It's just another piece of something. Then we have some suspicions and we have some guesses. But without Brian Winchester, none of that amounts to anything. And we know from the evidence and from the testimony by law enforcement, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it did not amount to anything. It did not amount to an arrest. All of the things that have been presented to you by the state attorney to suggest corroboration, standing on their own, do not prove anything. They never have, they never did, and they never will. All of these pictures that you may see of boat landings and of duck waders and of all of these other things that have always existed since 2000 do not independently prove anything about Denise Williams. You take Brian Winchester away, there is nothing about any of this evidence or any of this testimony that supports any of the three charges against Denise Williams. Now, the judge has given you a copy of the instructions. And you've listened to the judge, and you've read through the instructions, and I suspect, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that when you retire to deliberate, you will look back through the instructions. And I'm obligated to just point a few things out about the instructions. You have to prove that all of the elements, or you have to show that all of the elements have been proven. Mr. Fuchs went in reverse in his presentation and talked about the accessory after the fact. You have to look at that, and you have to look at what evidence there is that suggests that. Now, in a minute, when I talk about Brian Winchester, I'm going to talk about that evidence, accessory after the fact, because Mr. Fuchs says it is the phone call from Kathy Thomas, that communication, that is the evidence of the accessory. To be clear, before we get into Brian Winchester, there is nothing before he gets involved in this case and in this picture that substantiates any allegations against Denise Williams and doesn't do anything other than suspicions. Without Brian Winchester, I would sit down, you would go back, you would come back, you'd be not here. There would be no reason to be here. It would stop. Mike Williams was killed December 16, 2000. Law enforcement got involved. Law enforcement tried things. Law enforcement couldn't find anything. Nothing happened. August 5th, 2016. Over 15 years later. Denise Williams was going through a divorce. A divorce. I appear to have any philosophical, religious, or moral objections to divorce against Mr. Winchester. In fact, the testimony suggests that she had been separated from him since 2012 and had actually filed for divorce in 2015. No divorce problem there. No divorce problem at all. It was a bad marriage. Brian Winchester was a bad husband. Mr. Winchester was a controlling husband. He was a controlling man. And he did not like to be told no. He was the type of man who did not like to have someone tell him what to do. Because what was he? He was a financial planner. He sold insurance. He planned. And he sold. He planned and he sold. And on August 5th, 2016, he would have you believe that he simply wanted to go and talk to Denise. Now, this testimony from Dr. Mnookin, ladies and gentlemen, shows absolutely nothing, because you would have to believe the underlying statements that Brian Winchester gave to Dr. Mnookin. Dr. Mnookin's testimony is not evidence of anything. It's tainted, like everything else is, by the touch of Brian Winchester. And you heard Dr. Mnookin say it himself, and you can recall your own memory and your own notes, that Dr. Mnookin thought it was a pretty bad idea, if you're going to want to go talk to someone, to shove a gun in their ribs. But on August 6, 2016, Brian Winchester went to Denise Williams' home at between 2 and 3 a.m. because, as he testified, that's when it's darkest. He brought a gun, a backpack, he says a blanket, Agent Devaney says a tarp. He crawled into the back of her SUV. He sat there and he waited for hours. Periodically, he would take a spray bottle of water and make sure he sprayed the window so she wasn't going to be able to see him when she went to her car. Brian Winchester, at approximately 7 a.m., as Denise Williams was coming out of her home on her way to work, crawled over 2 rows of seats, scared her, put a gun to her ribs, and he kidnapped her. He kidnapped her with a firearm. He did not crawl over with a couple of concert tickets and ask her if she wanted to go see Sister Hazel. He kidnapped her at gunpoint. It is never disputed that he did the crime because, ladies and gentlemen, he pled to it. He admitted he did it. So he takes her at gunpoint to do God knows what. With a gun, with a tarp, with a sheet, with bottles. What was he going to do with her? What was he going to do to her? But she talks him down. She calms him down enough to get him to let her go. This man who supposedly knows the deepest, darkest, most heinous secret that Denise Williams plotted and planned for the murder of Mike Williams. That's what the state has to have you believe, ladies and gentlemen. You have to believe that on August 5th, 2016, she knew. She knew she had planned. She had been an accessory. You have to believe that. And if it's true, ladies and gentlemen, a jury, why does Denise Williams go to the police? The man with a secret that could lock her up, she goes to the police. She turns him in. Because he kidnapped her at gunpoint. Very reasonable to believe that if she ever had any suspicion that Brian Winchester had killed Mike, she would have taken him to the police for that. But she goes to the police. And she has the man who supposedly has this great, deep, dark secret against her, and she goes to tell the police what he did. Now, at this point, while she's at the Leon County Sheriff's Office, giving her report, telling them what happened, telling them about the gun, about the tarp, about the blanket, about the threat, about being kidnapped. While she is there telling law enforcement about how she had been victimized, in comes Agent Devaney, FDLE. FDLE. Working a case forever, hadn't gotten anywhere, didn't have anything. Boy, they had some suspicions. Why do they have suspicions? Because it's always the spouse. Don't take any rocket science or CSI or 5 hours of Law and Order. It's always the spouse. So he decides he's going to come in and he's going to confront Denise Williams. He's going to confront her while she is in the sheriff's office preparing reports and giving evidence related to being kidnapped by Brian Winchester. And Agent Devaney is mean to her. He just doesn't treat her well. She's there talking about being kidnapped. He wants to talk about her dead husband. And that's what he wants to do. He just wants to pester her and needle her. Denise Williams didn't have a hard time talking to law enforcement, ladies and gentlemen, because she went to them. She drove to the sheriff's office. Now, if a woman doesn't want to talk to law enforcement, ladies and gentlemen, the jury, driving to their office is a bad sign and a bad way to go about it. And remember, she never had a hard time talking to Sergeant Wooten. She's willing to talk to these people, even though supposedly Brian Winchester has this deep, dark secret over her because they planned it together. So, into jail, Brian Winchester goes. August 5th of 2016 was Brian Winchester's last day as a free man. Or was it? August 5th, 2016 was Brian Winchester's last day as a free man. Or was it? The testimony is uncontroverted that he was looking at life in prison. He's facing felony charges. He happened to have the misfortune or luck, depending on how one looks at it, to have his case assigned to a division presided over by Hangman Hankinson. Looking at life in prison, and the judge's colloquial nickname is Hangman? Ooh, young Mr. Winchester, he had some issues. He had some issues. He's not a free man. He's in jail. Denise Williams doesn't want him out of jail. She's scared of him. She's terrified of him. Kidnapped her at gunpoint. Threatened her. Young Mr. Winchester now is in jail. He doesn't like being there. And as he testified to, and it's interesting because when he testified on Tuesday, there were a lot more tears, much tighter performance. Wednesday, not so much tears. But he figured out he needed to use the word we a lot more on Wednesday. Didn't get so much we on Tuesday, get a lot of we on Wednesday. Kind of work to your audience a little bit, is Mr. Winchester's presumption. But what we know is Mr. Winchester is a murderer and a liar. And he's in jail. He doesn't like being in jail and he doesn't want to go to prison. From his own lips, I don't want to go to prison. So what does Mr. Winchester decide to do? Well, what do we know about Mr. Winchester up to this point? He's a planner. He's a salesman. There's one other thing about Mr. Winchester that's relevant at this point. He's already planted evidence before. Don't forget the hat. Remember the hat? Brian Winchester is out on Lake Seminole riding around with his dad, lying to everybody about what happened. Lying about what he knew. Lying about what he did. That didn't stop him from planting evidence. He put a hat out there. He planted evidence. So we've got a man who plans, we've got a man who sells, we've got a man who doesn't have a problem planting physical evidence. So when you have those three skill sets, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and your judge is Hangman Hankinson, and you're looking at life in prison, what do? Let's start with some obstruction of justice. Let's go ahead and see if Wade Wilson can help me get some evidence out there that's going to discredit Denise. Let's get Wade Wilson. And when I say Wade Wilson, I'm not talking about Deadpool. I'm talking about a guy who told Brian Winchester that he was a hitman. He was a convicted felon. He knew how to do this. Brian Winchester, that's his people. It's people he must have an affinity for. So he decides he's going to try to get Wade Wilson to help him out with some witness tampering, some obstruction of justice. Wade Wilson's not the only one. He's going to throw in Kimberly Adams. These are all things that, in between tears and in between performance, Mr. Winchester tells you. Yeah, we've got to get Kimberly Adams involved. And just to maybe round out my witness tampering obstruction of justice plan, I'm going to throw my sister in on it. My only sister. I'm going to try to get my only sister to tamper with witnesses and to obstruct justice. You don't have to have any more desire to pervert justice than to try to get your own sister drawn into witness tampering. But that's what he did. He was in jail from August 5th, 2016. And he was in jail in 2017. And all along, he had never had a confession. He had never had an epiphany. He had never gone to law enforcement to say, oh, by the way, I killed Mike Williams and I want to be forgiven. I want to be redeemed. Brian Winchester knew, just like every other person that testified, that the Mike Williams disappearance was a big story. It was a big news. People felt sympathy. People felt anger. People felt concern. It had high value information. So in the summer of 2017, after spending a year in jail and recognizing that his obstruction of justice and witness tampering plans were not going to work, because as Mr. Winchester said, lying only makes it worse. Probably a really late time in life to come up with that idea. But he said, well, lying made it worse. Or did it? I have tried witness tampering, sitting in jail. I got nothing else to do. And I'm a planner. I'm a salesman. And I'll obstruct justice. So what do I have to do? I will come up with not a life insurance policy. I am going to come up with a Brian life policy. I am going to come up with a way to not only get out of the serious trouble I'm in, the life felony that I'm looking at with Judge Hankinson, I'm going to give the state something so good, they're going to give me a free pass to murder. They're going to let me get away with it. And as icing on the cake, I get revenge on Denise Williams for turning me into the police on August 5th, 2016. So what does Mr. Winchester, the salesman, the planner, the liar, the murderer, what does he come up with? Of course, I told you I'd put it upside down. Comes up with Defense Exhibit 1. Interesting, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you didn't hear about this in the state's opening, and you also didn't hear about it in their first closing argument. You will get an opportunity to read this when you go back. It is a 3-page contract. It's styled a proffer of Brian Winchester, as you can see. It is not the Brian Winchester life policy. That probably would have been a little too obvious. But this 3-page document was entered into by the Office of the State Attorney and Mr. Winchester and Mr. Winchester's lawyers. And what does it do, ladies and gentlemen? We, the state of Florida, will give you use and derivative immunity for anything you tell us. Now, what do we know about October of 2017? We know that up until then, law enforcement has no independent evidence of the murder of Mike Williams. They have nothing. No one has been arrested. No one has been charged. They have a few little suspicions. They have a few little things that look funny. They look at, well, she married him. She must know something. They want you to believe that's got something to do with something, that she married a guy that she'd known since she was 3. She didn't know he was a murderer. Did find out ultimately that he was a bad husband. Miss Thomas knew that. I think the staffer knows that. I mean, everybody knows he's a bad husband. But up until October of 2017, there's no evidence. Nothing's going to happen on this case. So Mr. Winchester sells the Brian Winchester life policy to the state attorney's office. And what does he get? He gets never arrested for Mike Williams' murder. He gets never charged with Mike Williams' murder. He gets never had to come into a court and account for a murder. He will never get sentenced for that murder. He will never do time for that murder. He will never do probation for that murder. He will never pay a fine for that murder. He will never have to write a letter of apology for that murder. Nothing. But he was a better salesman because he added some more. The state agrees they're going to seek no more than 45 years in prison as a cap. The state agrees that they will not tell Judge Hankinson about the witness tampering, because it would be fair comment on the evidence to suggest that Judge Hankinson would not take kindly to that. He got everything he could ever hope for himself. And all he had to do was tell a little story and take him to where he had buried Mike. Because, of course, he knew where he buried Mike. Because what we know is that he took Mike Williams to a place they had hunted before, a place they knew. Took his best friend, talked to him every day. Known him since high school. Kids were about the same age. Start to plan early morning when it's dark. Sounds a lot like what he was going to do to Denise Williams. Of course, he hadn't perfected his murder, disposing of bodies, TARP plan in 2000. But he took a friend to Lake Seminole, put him in a boat, and threw him out of the boat. Now, this thing about waiters, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, has nothing to do with anything, because Brian Winchester and Mike Williams hunted together. They knew each other for years. There was no reason to believe that Brian Winchester would not have known that Mike Williams had had that waiter training. He knew how to get out of waiters. There's no reason to suspect that Mike Williams ever did tell Brian, hey, listen, I don't know how to get out of waiters. Of course you do. You did it in the guy's backyard. You knew how to do it. That's what hunters tell each other. You know, hey, I know how to do it. It's called drown proofing. People do it to their kids. Put in the waiters, throw them in the water. How to get out. When you're a hunter, you learn these things. You know how to do these things. You teach your children how to do it. I teach my children how to do it. But what does he do? He gets Mike in the water. He starts circling around him in his own boat through the stump field. And in the cold water, the dark water, the black water, Mike makes it to a stump. And he's yelling. He's yelling at Brian Winchester. And Brian is circling him. Circling him in Mike's own boat. He's circling him. He gets up close to him. He pumps his shotgun. Mike's yelling. He's bringing the boat. He gets up to 3 feet. And he shoots him in the face. Looked him in the eyes probably one last time before he took away the front of his head. 3 feet. Circles around again, reaches down in the water with his wet left hand, goes all the way down, pulls the body, drives over, leaves the body on the shore, backs his truck up. And he takes the lifeless, faceless body of his best friend. He shoves the head into a dog crate. Into a dog crate. And he speeds back to Tallahassee. Says he gets in bed with his wife. Interestingly, his wife never testified about remembering that. She said, I saw him around 3 o'clock at the family's function. Drives around, says he sees Mike Phillips at Walmart. Mike Phillips didn't see him at Walmart. But he did get a tarp, and he got a tool. He went out, dug a shallow grave, pulled his best friend out of the dog crate, rolled him up, put him in a tarp, put him in a hole. That's what he did. Yeah, he says, when I ask him questions, he says, we did it. I asked him if Denise Williams was with him on that cold morning in December 2000. And he says, she was in my head. There's no telling what else was in Brian Winchester's head, what voices he was hearing. He said, she was in my head. So he's got the story, because of course he knows the details because he killed Mike. He knows the details. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not corroboration. That's called a confession. If I tell you where I buried the body, I am not corroborating another fact. I am confessing to you what I have done. And he told whoever would listen, this is where the body is, let's go dig it up, let's have a field trip, because I'm good. I can feel relieved. Because I have the Brian Winchester life policy. It does not matter how bad this looks. It does not matter how bad it sounds. I am going free on the murder. Scot-free. So a couple of months pass. Mr. Winchester is brought before the court. He enters a plea. Judge Hankinson, who by the terms of this agreement is not aware of the Wade Wilson case. Read it carefully. Mr. Winchester and the state agreed not to tell the judge about the witness tampering. It's extremely unclear that the judge would have even known that that agreement existed. Because they entered an open plea, the judge considered only the kidnapping, only the armed assault. That was all that they told Judge Hankinson about. So Judge Hankinson sentenced Brian Winchester to 20 years in prison. 20 years. He hemmed and hawed a little bit about how much of that time he'll actually serve. But it's no more than 20 years from that date he got arrested in August of 2016. So the longest from the testimony that Brian Winchester is going to be locked up is until 2036. And it's only for kidnapping Denise. It's only for sticking a gun in her ribs. It is not for shooting his best friend in the face with a 12-gauge shotgun. And so now the state has the Brian Winchester life policy. And they've got, we found the body, but we're prosecutors, and so we're kind of into somebody's got to pay business. Brian Winchester's over there saying, hey, Denise helped me. Hey, what up? Denise did it. Because what do we know about Brian Winchester? He's a liar, and he's a murderer. I mean, he lied about, from the beginning of his case, he lied to his father. He lies to all these women over the years. He lies about it. He just lies. He's a murderer and a liar. But he's also a salesman and a planner. And the fifth thing, he likes to obstruct justice. So now, he's got these FDLE guys all on the hook. They are wrapped in on the Brian Winchester life policy. So what does law enforcement do? Well, let's set up some things where maybe we're going to lie to her. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do some lying. We're FDLE. As if they take a page out of the Brian Winchester playbook. Let's not be truthful. Let's take this phone call, this so-called phone call. Ladies and gentlemen, please listen to it. Don't listen to the edited parts. Look at your notes. That phrase, I'm going to tell Marcus to tell Brian, I'm like, that's not in that audio. What it is it's Kathy Thomas, who has been scripted by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, who is putting on a semi-Oscar-worthy performance with the snot and sniffling, talking about her marriage. She's the one that's bringing that up. There is no recording, email, text message, any kind of evidence that suggests Denise Williams ever said, tell Brian to tell Marcus or whoever. And if she did make that statement, she would have made that statement according to the state sometime in 2016. But all these recordings that Ms. Thomas is doing, they're in 2018. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't mean to particularly harp on Ms. Thomas, but one of the instructions is you can look to how a witness answered questions. If you think back on how Ms. Thomas was on answering questions and time and how things happened and what order they happened in, she's confused and she doesn't really know exactly what that was about. What she does know is Denise Williams told her, I don't want to talk to Mr. Devaney because I don't like him. Mr. Devaney is a jerk. That's what she told her. And she and Ms. Thomas talked every day by phone or by text. Ms. Williams didn't have any hard time talking to Leon County Sheriff's Office when Brian Winchester shoved the gun in her. Something that kind of looks good. But it's got to work with the Brian Winchester life policy. Because somebody has to pay. That's what the state needs you to do. They need you to come out and give them cover for not thinking about how bad this policy was going to be for them. They gave a free pass to a murderer. They got nothing else. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's always the wife. Follow the money. Do the easiest thing you can do. Just throw it up there and hope something sticks. Let's help Brian get that revenge he needs. Let's go after Denise. Because that's the story everybody wants to hear. That's the easy story. When Mr. Fuchs was talking to you and he was pointing to things, and he would say, the evidence corroborates, the evidence does this, the evidence does that. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, hindsight is 20/20. If you know what lie you're trying to spin, you can look back in your catalog of memories and try to find things that maybe work with the lie or the story you're making up. If you know what the story needs to be in 2017, you can give the person who's listening the facts you think that help support it. In the span of 21 years, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, without Brian Winchester, they have come up with this. It is not your place, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to feel sorry for anyone. It's certainly not your place to feel sorry for the state attorney's office for the horrible decision they made to give the murderer a free pass. But you certainly don't have to try to help them undo that horrible decision. This case is only about Brian Winchester. It is only about him killing Mike Williams. It is only about him. doing the most heinous thing that can be done to another human being. He took his life. He took away Denise's husband. He took away Ansley's father. He took away Cheryl's son. He took away Nick's brother. He took away all of the friends and family. Brian Winchester did that, not Denise Williams. There's no evidence that supports any of the allegations against my client. Not accessory, not principal, not conspiracy. I want to leave you with the final thought that I maybe touched on earlier, that when Brian Winchester was asked all these questions, and I was standing there, and I was talking faster than I probably am now, although I sense from the court reporter that I'm probably at about 300 words a minute right now. Okay, maybe a little under. But as I was standing there and I was asking him questions, you remember that at every gratuitous opportunity he would say, we. His scripted moment, he would say, we. Because he could think that maybe that fat, fuzzy lawyer is going to get up there and in that little snarky tone he takes, he's going to poke at me. So I need to be prepared for that. Because what am I? I'm a planner, and a salesman, and a murderer, and a liar, and an obstructor of justice. But when that lawyer comes at me, I'm going to say we. I'm going to show him. I'm going to show the jury that it's we. He was waiting for those questions. You can tell. Think back. Go through your memory. Go through your notes. Think about all the times you heard the word we. But then at the end, I asked the two questions that every defense lawyer on the planet would hope to ask and never expect an answer. Mr. Winchester, you are a murderer. Yes, I am. The next question, the one that every lawyer dreams of, to ask a witness in a trial. Mr. Winchester, you are a liar. Yes, I am. There is no we, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. There is only the I, that is him, that is Brian Winchester, who viciously murdered his best friend, dragged his body back to town in a dog crate, buried him in a shallow grave. To make this work for Brian Winchester, it doesn't really matter anymore. He's gotten all the benefit he's ever going to get out of that agreement, that deal, that Brian Winchester policy. But you see, the state's left with it now. They bought the policy. They bought it. They agreed to it. You don't have to. You don't have to buy a single thing that he sold them. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to do it. Because, ladies and gentlemen, jury, you took 3 oaths to tell the truth. It got you to where you're sitting here today. And I'm going to respectfully hold you to those oaths. And Denise Williams is going to hold you to those oaths. You're going to look at those instructions and you're going to see it. And you're going to look through it and you're going to look at that evidence. And you're not going to feel sorry for the state. You're not going to feel the need to somehow give them a conviction so they get something out of this. That's not justice. And these instructions will contain a phrase, miscarriage of justice. We are counting on you to return a verdict that speaks the truth, and that verdict is not guilty. To fail to follow these instructions is a miscarriage of justice. We believe you will not do that. We do know, however, ladies and gentlemen, jury, Brian Winchester will obstruct justice. Denise Williams is not guilty.